Welcome, thank you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time. I want to start by saying happy holidays and happy New Year to everyone. And for coming out on this beautiful December evening to listen to me present. I'm going to start by saying just a couple of things and pretty much stating the obvious, but if you probably stayed up a little late the other night, you heard some board members make some commentary, and I think it's pretty important to reiterate those comments tonight, and that's around this process. It really is a process. It's been a process that has been talked about, from my understanding here in Fairfield, for several years, and COVID kind of put a pause on it. But I think it's important just to realize that boards of education have to do everything out in public. So they have their discussions, their debates, their brainstorming sessions all out in public. And in order to come to a decision that will be best for the town of Fairfield and the Fairfield Public School community, they're going to have to eliminate ideas and topics that don't make sense for this process of redistricting. So I think it's important to understand that there's going to be things that are talked about, school closures, not closing, redistricting of these kids here, and feeder patterns, and all those things. But ultimately, those things will either move on to maybe the next phase of brainstorming and discussion, or be eliminated. So try to be understanding that it's not doomsday when they bring up a topic of, do we stay with 11 elementary schools or do we go to 10? That doesn't mean that's what the decision is going to be, but they're going to have the discussions around that to make sure that it gets eliminated and doesn't, is not brought up again later on as to, well, maybe we should consider this again because of this. So I think it's important just to understand that they are going to talk about things that may be near and dear to your heart, that make you cringe, that bring high levels of anxiety, not that it's not up there already, but it's only part of a process to eliminate possibilities and really get to what will work in order to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Number two, I think it's important to understand that this is not about McKinley School solely. McKinley School and what the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education is requiring of the Fairfield Public Schools is just a small component. So initially I was going to go through this entire slide presentation that was presented when McKinley families needed to understand the why behind what's happening from the State Department of Education and the State Board. But it's really not pertinent to tonight except for a couple of aspects. Number one, the law. And as you can see, Connecticut's racial imbalance law was adopted April 1st, 1980, quite a bit of time ago. Does that law pertain to the 2022 standards, 2023 standards? Maybe not. The world has changed a lot since 1980. I'm not going to date myself, but I was 10 years old. So I think the world and Fairfield itself and the state of Connecticut has drastically undergone a transformation of diversity across the state and across communities. However, it was amended. I don't know what the amendment from 1980 to 1999 looks like, but I'm sure it wasn't much. So this is just part of the school reporting. As you can see, there's a lot of components to this, 10-226E-3, how they determine what a racial imbalance of a school is. Not going to bore you with that. Not sure if it's on our web, it is on our website, I'm sorry. And then there's some more question and answers that you can, if you'd like after tonight, just shoot me an email. There's some clarity. More than happy to get you that information. And then the reason for a plan. And we had to submit a plan to the state board. I know you're all pretty much aware on November 2nd, my second day here in the district. It was approved. I've already received a letter from the Commissioner of Education, Charlene Russell Tucker, about talking about the first interval after the new year of having an update on what that plan looks like on that date compared to when it was approved. So we need to start moving in the direction to address McKinley School specifically. But as you all know, McKinley School cannot be addressed without addressing other parts of the district. And these are some of the things that cause the racial imbalance data. As you can see, the percentage, what the imbalance is on October 1st, which is the reporting day that the State Department of Ed looks at all data. So all enrollment data is calculated on October 1st. For some folks, there's some adjustments that are made. It's really finalized in January, but these are the numbers that usually we go by, and there are very little fluctuation. We just kind of have some time until January as a district to clean it up. And then a year later, as you can see, not much had changed. We went from 29.36 of the imbalance to 28.27. I don't anticipate that changing much on October 1st, 2023. One of the key components, I think, that really raises eyebrows at the State Department of Ed is academic achievement. And the feeling that you're not only racially imbalanced at the school, but it's also reflected in your data compared to the rest of your district. So they look at a correlation between academic achievement and the racial imbalance. And I think there's something worth noting here. The district does have about a 35% transient rate over time. What that means, on this year's current fifth graders, only 65% of them have been in the same school since they enrolled in kindergarten. So that tells a little bit of a story. McKinley happens to have the highest in the transient rate at 53%. The lowest is only about 71%. I believe that's at First School. So there is significant movement throughout the district, in the town, in and out. But it is worth mentioning here as well, because some of that data that we're looking at may not be correctly being viewed at the state and cohort data, could just be raw numbers. So that's something that we're going to discuss, and I will discuss with the Commissioner of Education at our first meeting after the meeting. Then it breaks it down into subgroups. Again, not going to go through each and every one, but as you can see, there is significant differences at McKinley when you look at the demographic data compared to the rest of the district. So that does raise some eyebrows at the State Department of Ed. If you have these disparities, but also you have, in conjunction with that, a correlation between that and they're saying academic achievement. Here's one of the biggest areas, and that is in elementary language arts, academic performance. One of the things that is implemented in the plan that was mentioned at the State Board of Ed meeting that they specifically commented on was our work that we're going to be embarking on, many of you have heard about, in our ELA K-5 curriculum and resources that will align to the new legislation here in Connecticut, the Right to Read bill. So that is part of our plan. It's a part that they stressed and they thought was an important component to racial imbalance, how to address the racial imbalance at McKinley School. Skip forward, I think this is just a little bit more of the why for McKinley parents and a little bit less than is probably of interest to the group here tonight. We're not going to have next questions on this. Do we have the other slide? The second one? Yeah. So the real focus, I think, is in the next slide presentation. I'm not going to go through every single slide of it. Again, it's a lot of redundant information, but there are some things that are worth highlighting. And this is the real why in terms of the racial, the redistricting, is the effective and efficient use of all our school buildings, especially at the elementary school. And I think that's an extremely important, this was updated last month. It is data that was collected. I'm sure you've heard a lot about SLAM. They're the organization that the district contracted to do the study of enrollment in the district. This is really good data. They do a deep dive. I know there will be some folks that will question some of their data, but they are, the accuracy is pretty good. going to fast forward to slide 8. As you can see at the elementary level, it gives you class inventory, total full classrooms, total full-size instructional classrooms, other full-size classrooms that are, and then total small spaces that are used for other purposes. And as you can see, there was at the time some portables that are not included in the classroom space. I believe, as you heard, that those things are being phased out, which need to be phased out. Shouldn't be putting kids in portables when we do have space available, as you can see across the district. So, there are some changes from when the 2017 capacity study was done. Holland Hill was completed. There is a capacity of 504 students. You've heard the term at the board meetings of 504 school. There's 4 sections per grade across all grade levels at the school. Mill Hill project is now complete. 441 students attend that school. I was there today. It's a beautiful facility. The portables at both Holland Hill and Mill Hill have been eliminated, which is great news. There are 9 fewer classrooms are being used at grades K-5 instructional classrooms compared to 17-18, largely due to the decline of 190 students across the district since that time. These classrooms have been repurposed to support other programs. These are pre-K programs that you've heard of at Stratfield School, special ed classrooms, CLC, resource, and other support programs. We've also had some expansion of some of these programs across the district as well. Another slide worth mentioning is going to be slide 14. And this really looks at the capacity of the school, the October 1st enrollment from this past year, a couple of months ago, and what that utilization rate at each building. So as you can see, you have a variation of 73% up at Byrd and 91.5% at Osborne Hill. And as you have heard at the recent board meeting, the principles that have been adopted really hover around 85% is what the number they'd like to have at all buildings. That will take into account the ability to place specialized programs. So as you can see, we're operating at about 80% utilization at across 11 of our elementary schools. So as you can imagine, there is room for improvement here, hence the necessity with what the State Department of Ed and the State Board of Ed is holding over our head in terms of McKinley School and getting that school in balance, and then what we have here in underutilization at many of our schools. I'm going to stop right there. I think at this point, I'd like to see if any of our board members would like to add anything, or do we want to open it up to the public to begin the conversation? We're going to open it up to the public. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm being told that we may have had an error in the McKinley enrollment data. The capacity at 504, not 519. So Mill Hill is wrong? Oh, no, these are operational capacity. Yeah, this is operational capacity. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. So yeah, if it's really casual, if you just want to come up and raise a topic, and we're happy to engage in any of these issues, or just either on the presentation, questions on that, or on just the process going forward, or specific scenarios, or whatever. So you can come on. We do need you to come up to the podium and speak into the microphone, only just for Fair TV, if you wouldn't mind. And just state your name if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yulia Bahania. A term used in one of the meetings, we are fairly new to the neighborhood, so we didn't participate in all the meetings. I saw some of the footage. There was a term used called fringe walkers. Can you elaborate on that and explain what that means?
I've never heard it. Where was that?
In one of your board meetings was used, the term was used, fringe walkers. Kids that walk to school but are on the fringe.
Is that in reference of not eligible, I mean, that they are eligible for a bus, but choose to walk or drive?
No, they're not eligible for bus, they're on the like far enough that we call for walk.
I don't know what that, I've never heard that term before.
So people that walk local to schools maybe, but aren't zoned for a bus in their own district. There are examples of it between like North Stratfield and Stratfield.
I've never heard the term, sorry. I don't know what that
People use
means.
it anecdotally, I've heard it in dating.
So the way we classify students, you're either a walker, meaning not eligible for a bus. It doesn't mean you like to walk, or you can ride your bike, or you can rollerblade. It means you are not eligible within our busing guidelines to get a bus. So people like say, well, we can walk to school, but technically speaking, you're a walker if you're not eligible for the bus. Does that help you? Okay.
So I'll just make a statement that I prepared just based on some of the information that I got. So we moved within the last 2 years, and we moved to the area that we did around Sherman Elementary School because of walkability to school, train, and town. We're committed walkers. We're within 0.9 miles of the school, which not a lot of people walk, but we do, and a lot of our neighbors walk. We see clear benefits of walking to school. If you look at the scientific facts, it increases daily physical activity with students. It ensures students arrive at school alert, awake, ready to learn. It fosters academic achievement, and it improves family and community engagement for parents and kids, has positive social opportunity for students, families, and teachers. Any redistricting proposal that would take a walker and put him or her on the bus, in our opinion, my family and a lot of our friends should be rejected. Any language or edits to the facilities planning principles that make it easier to justify busing a child away from his walking school should be reconsidered, in my opinion. And I applaud the work that the board does. I enjoyed last meeting that you guys had, even though it was difficult. I thought the discussion was amazing. I think you do great work. I know that redistricting is challenging, but it's a slippery slope when core principles are abandoned. So I'm here to request a strict policy on protecting elementary school kids who are considered walkers.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Come on. Yeah.
So basically what you said.
And if you have questions, so that, we can engage too, so if there's a
My name is Danielle Gelfand. I live at 57 Newell Place with my husband George and my daughter Colette. We are walkers at our local elementary school, Roger Sherman, where Colette is in kindergarten. In June of 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, we moved to Fairfield, knowing nothing about Fairfield because it was such a community. And in this neighborhood in particular, because of its walkability, especially to school, which was so appealing. I understand, or I should say, it is my understanding that walkers to school are at the risk of being redistricted, and I hope this is not the case. There are only a few true neighborhood schools in town, one being Sherman, where it has this kind of walkability. As far as I know, is new. One of the things that keeps my family emotionally and physically healthy is walking. It keeps us connected to our local community, which is even more important after 2 years of isolation, especially as new residents. There are so many mental, physical, and emotional benefits of walking for all, but especially for children, as we all know. Just 20 minutes a day of physical activity improves physical and mental health, can boost immune systems, boost academic performance, improve sleep, and give children a sense of confidence and independence, as well as a sense of community. As a family of 2 working parents who are also caregivers to my 91-year-old mother, being bused means being removed from our community and making it harder to get involved at school, which is something that is so important to all of us. It also does not seem financially or environmentally prudent to add buses and congestion to any neighborhood, especially these neighborhoods. Redistricting is so complicated, but I hope the Board of Education commits to walkers and does everything it can to keep them walking at school. So that's my statement. But I should also say, I'm a writer. I interview people all day. I'm a veteran TV producer. And storytelling is what I do. And I have never had more difficulty in trying to unravel for the last 2 years, like listening to all the parent groups and reading all the documents, what is actually happening, what happened in the past, and like what the process actually is. So, you know, my husband and I we got a sitter, we went to the meeting on Tuesday, we tagged team, he stayed till 12:45. I was like, what's happening now, what's happening now, what's happening now? And he's like, I honestly don't know. Like, I mean, he would, you know, he reports, and then I always follow up. I ask all the groups, like on Facebook, and sorry. Anyway, the thing is, I think there's a lot of confusion. So to know what your process is and what happened, our consultants, what was laid out in 2020 or 2016, is that applicable? It would be really helpful to know and hear from the source. So, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Gerber. I'm on the Board of Education. I've been on for 11 years, and I had children in the district from 2003 to 2020. So, and my kids went to Osborne Hill School, which was always under the gun for redistricting because they were overcrowded. So, you know, this is, and one of the reasons I got involved in Board of Ed issues was because I was concerned about my children being redistricted to another school. And there were all sorts of plans that were always being floated out. One year they were going to take one neighborhood off Mill Plain Road and put them in Dwight. Then they were going to put them at Riverfield. Then they were going to take all the kindergartners and move them to Burr for a year. I mean, all sorts of things that happened. And, you know, there's a lot that's happened in Fairfield in terms of facilities over the years. So, I mean, there are people on this board who grew up in Fairfield, who were redistricted themselves, who probably have their own stories to tell. When I first became involved, I really went, you know, did a deep dive in terms of the history of facilities and closing schools and reopening schools and redistricting and adding 70 portables throughout the district, which was really bad for the district in many, many ways. So we've kind of come out of that. We just got rid of some of the last, we only have 2 portables left in elementary school, one at Jennings and one at Sherman, and they're not used as primary classrooms. So that's great. But there are still a lot of other things. Now we see, you know, when Mr. Testani showed the utilization rates, you could see that some of the schools are underutilized and others are starting to get overcrowded again. So there is that whole aspect to it. Then there's the whole separate racial imbalance. So one of the things I would say, and this probably isn't a great time of the year for that because everyone's really busy, but there is a tremendous amount of information on our website. Like if you go to the Fairfield Schools website, under racial imbalance, you will see all of the different racial imbalance plans, documents, everything dating way back to when McKinley first became an imbalance, which was almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago. So you can really kind of see the whole trajectory of what happened. You know, and this came up, the last major redistricting that took place was when Burr was opened as a school. So we had to redistrict because we had a new school. And so at the time, there was one plan, there were about 15 different redistricting plans that kept getting put out in the public. And one was to take half of, or maybe a third to half of McKinley and a third to half of Stratfield and switch them. Just because they were redistricting everyone, so they were hoping maybe they could just kind of fix that. And it didn't go over very well, and that was one plan that didn't end up working. So there's a lot of history to this, and I don't want to go on because I could go on for hours, and I don't want to bore everyone, but there's a lot of information on the website. It shouldn't be, but
I just mean, you know, I guess the big question that I have is, like, what, if you could answer, what is being considered from like the last draft? I feel like there's 20 different answers.
well, right now we aren't considering anything at this point because we're in the process of getting new numbers because obviously a lot of the numbers that we got the last time when we were discussing things right before COVID came on, numbers have changed. So a lot of those plans don't really, or might not really hold any water now.
So that's super helpful to know, so it's like the sort of like the scenario.
Some of the scenarios probably don't work anymore, others might. And there may be new scenarios that haven't been discussed that might, you know, come. So we are still in the early stages of this process. And while it is certainly helpful to look at those old plans from 2016, from 2019, 2020, just to kind of see hypotheticals, those were 2 years ago. Some of the students in elementary school now are in middle school. There are all these new kids who were in preschool who are now people who have moved to Fairfield, like you. So, I mean, there are lots of people who were not in the picture when these last plans were done. So we understand that, and that's why we need to get these new numbers from SLAM and new plans from SLAM based on the criteria that we give them.
And that's super helpful to know, just like we bring further people coming to follow around, or?
Yes, we are engaging SLAM, who was formerly known as Malona McBloom, who did do the previous numbers. Yeah, SLAM is what Malona McBroom is now SLAM. So when you look at the Malona McBroom plans online, that's who SLAM is now. They will look at the new numbers, they will come up with new plans. Some of them may look a lot like the last ones, others may be completely different. And we haven't seen any of those plans yet, so it's not like we have, we've been looking at secret plans that we know more than you do. We truly don't at this point. No, and I'm not saying you do, but I just think it's important to say that we're really in the early stages of this ourselves.
And hopefully, no, like, we, you know, thank
So just to follow up, in terms of the process, what's going to happen is that this board will come up with a new charge. What we call what a charge is what we tell the consultants to look at for scenarios. So we want you to look at possibly operating with 10 schools. We want you to look at maybe moving some pre-Ks to different locations, whatever it may be. So on the other night, on Tuesday, we had some preliminary conversation at the table about some ideas that board members might want to look at. And from that, we'll create a draft charge, like a first read, for the board to consider, further amend that, and that's going to be in early January. So we're going to be having that January 4th workshop, which is really the board to sit down and talk about this issue specifically and get a better handle on our charge that we will give to SLAM to go out and look at in terms of the scenarios. Yeah.
So, you know, one of the big questions was the language, like must versus strive. And honestly, like, I don't know what the way things are going on, or not, is legislative. Can you explain like and what that we're gonna
So just to repeat the question for Fair TV in case they didn't hear you. The question, if I understand it right, was what was the outcome of the discussion on the facilities planning principles? So if you, anyone in the public that wants to go to the meeting recording and watch that discussion, you can actually see what amendments were voted on to that document compared to what was originally proposed as a first read. And that final document, now that it was voted on, will be posted. Okay, so that will be posted to the website so that was voted. The outcome was we voted to approve the facility planning principles as amended. So that will be published to the website as soon as those. For the community school portion, the word strive was kept. Anyone else in the public?
How you doing? Thanks for this opportunity. Every meeting I've been listening to and patiently. Oh, David Krasnoff, 155 Burr. And I've been patiently waiting and listening, and now I guess there's an opportunity to express something I would love you guys to look at. The common theme I hear, and almost every time this is brought up, is that there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot that needs to get done. Some people, like Mr. Peterson, have said that they wish they had more time to do this because it's difficult to do all this stuff. I do propose possibly looking at the smallest impact now to appease the state. Take some time, look at everything, look at the facilities. I'm not saying you're keeping 10 or 11 schools, whatever, but figure that out. Figure out what's going on with maybe the middle schools, and then come up with a more complex plan that the whole public can wrap their head around. The Board of Ed then will be able to do a little more research. You'll know the impact of COVID hopefully by then. And I just think it's the smart way to go about it. To rush and come up with a plan because you send info to SLAM and they tell you this is the best plan, I don't know if that's the best way to go about this at this point. I'll open up to any answers to that. But I do hope you propose the least impact For example, Commerce Drive, I know there's a big building that went up there, possibly moving that whole street somewhere else may have an impact. I'm just throwing out ideas, but you'd probably get that order. Thank you, I was behind a post over there, so for the sake of fair TV. Well, if you want to ask follow-up questions, I'll be able to find you. Let me try to answer this from my perspective in the simplest way. I have been an advocate for redistricting for some time, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about before in terms of imbalance between schools. Some schools kind of underpopulated, some schools overpopulated, and we haven't done this for almost 2 decades at that level. I was also the person that Ms. Gerber spoke to who went through this as a kid here in town, and I have a very visceral reaction to what you just said, so I'm going to try to dial that back a little bit. I understand what you're saying. I have said explicitly that I had hoped that we would have much more time to deal with this, because there's a facilities component, there's a finance component to this, that if we wanted to do the absolute best job we can, I would love to have, say, a 3-year runway to really bring in the town to work with our waterfall fund, what projects we can do. We don't have that time currently. But I want to push back against your idea, again, this is kind of from my perspective, that we should do it to small groups in the short term. What happens in those cases is that you're taking just a couple of kids from one area, and you're taking them out of their environment and moving them to a whole new area, where they're also not going to be in with a group of kids that has just moved there. My wife, in 1981, was one of 7 kids who was sent out of Oldfield, which is now the senior center, to Riverfield School, whereas most of her friends went to other schools in bigger chunks. I went with about 2/3 of Osborne Hill to Jennings. I was with people that I knew, and everyone in town kind of felt the weight in one way or another, whether you were in your school and there were a whole bunch of new people, or you were one of a group that went to a different school. And that's the model that I would prefer. For my wife, who was one of 7 kids, it was a horrible, horrible, horrible experience. And from the beginning of this process, I've been opposed to the idea of what we call pocket redistricting. Let's slice off a street here and move them there for that exact reason. I think that this is a problem that we need to deal with on a town-wide basis. Again, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying about trying to find ways to give ourselves more time. I think I personally would prefer to just do the work as much as we can. Just this month, I don't know how many meetings I've been to just this month alone. We are busily working and trying to deal with this in as comprehensive and thoughtful a manner as we can, given the time constraints that are wanted for the state. Yeah, but with the bigger district, you may end up with that same situation based on software kids and programs. I don't see the difference. That may happen, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen on a town-wide basis, and so we're going to try to do it in a way that's. I personally, so other board members to chime in on this. I personally don't like the idea of singling out a street and saying you're the one who's going to bear the brunt of this. If you start from kindergarten or something, that's your. Well, I said we're talking about grandfathering now, and that's kind of.
Yeah, I'm saying the least impact to people, especially coming out of COVID time. If you could only impact 100 people instead of 2,000 people, and then really look at it and fix whatever schools, fix facilities.
Like,
and have a plan to move 2,000 people, I think the public will swallow it. Like, wait, that's just my opinion. You can ask the public, but I think everybody.
I think one thing you always have to keep in mind, and I totally understand your argument, but if you're one of that group of 100 people, it's going to impact you a lot. I guess one example I'll use, and I was not on the board when this happened, but we had the middle school redistricting. They had to do it because Woods was having space added on. And the board at that time had the option that they could have just moved a couple of small pieces. And, it wouldn't have been ideal, but it was okay. And they chose to instead move a lot of elementary school feeders. And a lot of people were really angry, and there were a lot of big meetings with a lot of angry people coming out and everything like that. But I'll tell you right now, and I'm sure there's some people in this room who disagree, I think that the plan that they came up with, and I was not on the board at the time, so I have no skin in the game, and my kids were redistricted, it actually made a lot of sense in a lot of ways with the parameters that they set for themselves. And they could have taken the easy route out and just impacted a small number of families, but they didn't because they felt that this bigger plan made more sense. Now, I don't know what plans we're going to be looking at because we don't have them yet. But I just think I'm very hesitant at the idea of saying, well, it's not going to impact that many people, so that's the better plan.
I'm not saying don't do a big plan. I'm saying don't rush forward.
I don't think anyone here wants to rush, and I will tell you right now, I mean, if we get a bunch of plans that make absolutely no sense whatsoever, I don't see myself feeling comfortable in approving them, and I can't speak for everyone else on the board, but we're not going to approve, just kind of pick a plan because, well, this is going to be really difficult for all of us and everyone in this room and everyone in this town, but we take this very seriously, and we will work very hard to make sure that whatever decision we make is the right one to the best of our abilities, and if we feel that the options that are given to us are not good options, then we might not accept any of those options and go back to the drawing board again. And again, I don't know what we're going to get because we don't have anything yet.
So do we know in, let's say, 5 years, 2 or 3 of the schools are renovated or rebuilt or whatever, that we're not going to do this year?
Again, I think we're going to have to see what those plans are. I can't, these are all hypotheticals. We don't know what the plans are going to look like right now. And again, they may make no sense whatsoever, or they may be something that none of us have thought about that does make some sense. So
So that's a fear you guys have to, down the road, be a problem for your
I think that's always a fear. I mean, for instance, Osborne Hill School, where my kids went to school, they had a huge number of kids moved out to go to Burr when Burr opened. And within 2 years, they were overcrowded. So yeah, it can certainly happen. Populations of schools ebb and flow. Right, and Dwight lost a ton of kids when Burr opened as well, and they didn't go back. So those are 2 different examples.
Hi, Jen Minelli. One point I'd say to that you just said, because that of course is a very good point, what ifs. One significant difference in this scenario is we already know some of the what ifs, and so to do what you're suggesting would be to ignore those. It's one thing if we say, whatever we come up with as a plan right now addresses everything. We have the ECC to solve. We have the utilization rate to address. We have the racial imbalance plan to address. Those are known factors. They're not going away. So for us to just say, well, we're just going to solve one of the 3 and get back to the other 2, what I would say to that is I actually commend this body of 9 that we are committed to, look at the number of meetings we're having. We are committed to addressing what is in front of us in its totality, because it's not going away. And that does not mean when you come to me 5 years from now, not that I will probably be here, but when you find my email and say, see, I told you so, I'm not disagreeing. I think it's the same to Mrs. Gerber's point. We're not saying that if we down the road decided to make Jennings a 504 as an independent school, now you have a much bigger school include. That board will, cross that bridge when they get to it. But we have 3 significant factors in front of us now. And so to only address one, first of all, you were most certainly then putting a group of students in the path for being redistricted twice in a short amount of time, which is not, it might be great for the rest of the town, but not fair to those students. And we have to factor that in. The smallest impact, on the smallest number of people is something that, it's not that it's an insensitive comment, but it's something that does sound great when you think, well, that's not my kid. We can't take that approach.
So is it going to be a scenario test? What is that look?
I couldn't agree with Mrs. Gerber more. We just don't know. And again, to reiterate the point that those plans that we had in the past, they're done. Those scenarios we had looked at before, there is no plan that we have seen for what we're now doing as of December 15th, 2022 going forward. We are at blank slate, aside from the conversation you heard Tuesday night for ideas that were, throwing spaghetti at the wall. So if you stay tuned, you're going to be getting live access to what we are thinking about, to what, again, I thought it was really important that Mr. Testani made that point to everyone here. The fact that this is a messy process. You're going to hear some plans and think that's outrageously bad. Okay, well then let's trust that we're going to come to that same conclusion, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't raise the ideas. So again, I'll stop there, but I guess the significant difference being we have 3 significant things in front of us right now, not just one. And while one may have the burden of state statute behind us, we can't ignore the other, or we'd be wrong to ignore the other 2.
Or simply fixing those 3 problems.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Are simply fixing those problems partly within the plan, or is it going to only need to fix the problem?
I think that those are 3 things that have been something we've been talking about for the longest. Obviously, if you paid attention Tuesday night, a few other things got brought up about middle school. It got way bigger because there are other things that we know of that are problematic, but would not in and of themselves, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but they in and of themselves would not have generated a redistricting conversation. But since we are having a redistricting conversation, let's not ignore some other things that we know are going on in the district, and let's see if we can't address them all. I just wouldn't have called them the drivers.
Frank Sahagian. Question for you guys. There is on the website June 2022 projected enrollments. Are you not using those numbers? I'm just trying to be clear as to what number, or are you going to go back and have them redo the numbers? There's a lot of detailed numbers in terms of 10-year projections at a lot of levels. So you're using those numbers. So we're not going to have them go back and relook at those numbers 6 months later as to, for redistricting. For the plan. So those are the numbers they're using. So we also already have quite a bit of information at hand. But not the plan. I get that. I just wanted to put that out there, though. So we have quite a bit of information to put a plan together. Do we not have enough information to determine whether or not we are going to close the school? We don't have enough information now to do that?
I think those numbers are a piece of the puzzle, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to get those numbers when we did, even though we had to spend extra money to get those updated 10-year projections. I think that with certain things that happened, like Mill Hill's capacity being different than what was originally in last scenarios and whatnot, for me, I need to see, and I would like to see it in a plan to see how it flows out. I couldn't make that decision today.
I'll follow up on that, piggybacking on Mr. East's comment on our capacity. A few things are also different from the 17-18 or 2020. We're continuing to need to build in special programming for diverse learning populations that require classroom space. So that number is continuing to grow. Our CLCs, our TLC, and now our Early Literacy Academy, so those require classrooms. And when you see sections and an enrollment, those are just like homerooms, like your kids' 5G or whatever it may be. But you have to remember there's a whole bunch of other classrooms being used that aren't in homerooms, so to speak, so we have to calculate into the math. Also, there's just been a lot of development in town too, and things that aren't built yet but are approved, so we're having to look more and more at town planning and zoning and just the size of buildings that are coming into our community and how that might impact the numbers that you were saying because they're not here yet. So that's a 10-year enrollment projection based on known at the time they were made. So again, there's always, then the further you go out, the more likely statistically they would vary a little bit. In the first 5 years, they're likely to be pretty accurate, but there are other factors to consider besides those. But if you were to ask me, yeah, but we're not demographers, and I think that we do have a responsibility to look at scenarios in case there's something that comes up that we might not think of, but I think it would be a challenge, would be my answer.
So one of the things which I suspect will not change in those projections that they did in June was that the elementary number was bottomed out. and that we're at a bottomed out level right now. You know, I don't think you have to be a rocket science with 80% capacity. We're not going to get to, we don't want, you know, we want to be around 85 or so. We're not far off. So to me, it just is sort of as plain as day that you don't need to close an elementary school because you bottomed out. So I'm not sure why we're having that conversation even, and, you know, having to see those things all over town and closing the school when the numbers are, we bottomed out and we're going the other way. So can somebody please address?
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons why we're having that discussion is because we have a facilities plan where we are looking at the costs that, you know, on our long-range facilities plan. We just completed Mill Hill. The next two schools that are the last two elementary schools that have major renovations and/or expansions would be Jennings and Dwight. So we do have some numbers for them, and they're pretty big, especially for Dwight. And so obviously, if we are going to be talking to the other town bodies and saying that we would like to get this money to renovate or rebuild if we need to, you know, and I'm not saying one or the other, I'm just saying those are the conversations that are taking place in the public, that we're going to need money from the town. And the town's going to say, well, look at this enrollment, you know, look at how many empty classrooms they have when they're really not empty. You know, you go to any elementary school, you will see that they are using those classrooms for many different purposes. Nonetheless, you know, we have these enrollment numbers, we have capacity numbers, the town bodies are approving funding for these projects. They want to understand, well, why are we going to spend $50 million, $60 million on a school that only has 250 children in it or something like that? So can we close it? So for me personally, I don't think, and I've been really vocal about saying I've never seen how we could possibly close an elementary school, and I'm very wary about it, you know, with our past history. That said, I think it would be very helpful to have someone, not one of the 9 of us, someone who does this for a living, say, you can't do it. And then we can bring it to the town bodies and say, see, it's not just us saying it, we can't do it, but we still need to try to get these buildings with air conditioning and other things that they need. So that's why, to me, it's very important to have that plan, to be able to say, see, we can't.
I have a question about, so as we address the racial imbalance at McKinley and trying to understand the numbers, one of the things I was wondering, if you look at the district map and you look at the McKinley map, actually many of the districts that go north to south, you know, that are along this way, and it obviously butts up against a number of other, you know, Holland Hill, Stratfield, a little bit of Sherman, so it's, you know, it's got a lot of ways that it can change. So the question is, do we know where the racial imbalance is within McKinley district? McKinley School is up in the upper northwest corner of that thing, so it's not even centrally located. Do we know where does the racial imbalance exist throughout the entire district geographically, or is it located at one particular place?
I'll take a crack at that. Not officially, right? But if you spent any time looking at our census tract data, and which is something I won't, don't laugh, but I do, trying to understand some of this better. So I was really excited for 2020 to come out. Yeah, Tungus Hill, I won't start throwing numbers at you, but Tungus Hill area and where the Commerce Drive area would be a little bit. If you recall, Holland Hill used to be impending racially imbalanced as well. So just that whole area has a far greater population density. It's just how the town over time decided to kind of plan our neighborhoods out. Has much more higher density, different types of housing available. So that does, in that whole part that bumps up against Bridgeport and a little bit into the Holland Hill area, if you just take the school names away, but you just look at the census tracts, you will find a more diverse population than, say, up in the Burr or Greenfield Hill or those other areas. So I would say yes. We don't know what the numbers are, but we know that go ahead.
we're not allowed to move based on race. That's okay, just to be clear, we cannot go in and say, aha, we found a pocket here. We're going to move you based on race. We can't, that's illegal. What we can do is one point, and this statute did appear, I think, on one of the maps we saw at some point in time, I don't know when. We can, for example, look at free and reduced lunch. We can look at, to Mrs. Jacobson's point, we can look at rental properties. We can look, obviously, at density. But to your question, we cannot move a neighborhood based on race.
Just to, I happened to wake up the other night at about 11 o'clock and turned on the TV and saw you guys were still there, and I go, oh my God, and they haven't even done yet, you know, and it was after 12 o'clock, and then you were starting to throw out all the information, it's like, oh my God. The point was brought up again, you know, I've talked a lot about middle schools and the concerns about the middle schools, and there was an interesting thought that was brought up about, you know, as we get into feeders, about perhaps Tomlinson becomes a 6th grade school, or something else that made me think that was an interesting thought, something else that, you know, we could possibly do, since the middle school enrollment is going to be declining. That we can also see based on the G numbers. The middle school numbers are declining, the elementary has bottomed out, so, you know, that gives us opportunities in middle school perhaps to approach it differently. You know, right now you have feeding four schools feed Woods, 4 schools feed Ludlow, 3 feed Tomlinson. Perhaps to support the team concept, you could go 5, 3, and 3. Something to be looked at down the road when you get into the feeder situation. There was a thought here about middle schools. The other thing was that, so the process with Malone Slam now, when will be the time, is this going to be set out in stages to them to give us information and stop at a particular point so then we can regroup and look, okay, we see this information and now we can look at, for instance, how we want to feed the middle schools? Or are we going to give it to them right from the beginning and have them try to go soup to nuts from the beginning? Or are we going to take this in a staged approach as we give them information and ask for them to provide us information?
I think from my point of view as superintendent, because I'm going to field the phone calls from all of you and the questions, and I don't mind that. I think that it needs to be regularly looked at, questions asked. So I guess you could say in stages, but I think the charge needs to be all given, have some things come back and recommendations, and I think this 9 panel with hopefully a little bit of input from me will be helpful in then ruling out some of the scenarios that may come forth, and then I'm sure go back to the drawing board a little bit. But I think you have to give them everything up front, because if not, they're going to be working against each other, and this will go on for years if you don't tell them this, and it's a big piece of information.
Thank you. I'll do it quickly and then we'll let others come up. But so in our plan, we are supposed to be voting on the action plan, so to speak, by the end of October of 2023. And of course, this is going to have multiple phases where we get plans, and then we have more community meetings, and then we have more meetings, and we get follow-up questions typically done, but that is the timeline where we're supposed to decide. The implementation date that we indicated to the state is for the 2024-2025 school year, and part of the reason I can imagine, at least by the December, is because if there are budget implications, we would need to know that for January 2024 in order to build in any staffing or busing, whatever. There could be fiscal things that come with some of these ideas. So in order to do our due diligence on the budget piece, I think we would need to know that for January 24 if we're going to implement in 24-25. Make sense? Okay.
So just at some point, we're going to have to address the parameters that you give them, such as, not having a singleton in the middle school, feeding a high school, and what determines what high school one goes to. Right now, it's elementary school. Somewhere along the lines, we're going to have that conversation, right? And I'm not sure when that's going to happen. And I'm going.
I mean, I think that just when we do the charge, determining whether or not we want to keep the current feeder pattern for elementary schools would be a conversation that we would have at that point. And we'll leave it at that, short and sweet on that one.
Hi everyone, Samantha Guerin, Country Road. Parent of 2 kids at Holland Hill, a kindergartner and a second grader. We are dedicated walkers, and so I just wanted to raise another voice in support of protecting walking neighborhoods if at all possible in consideration of this. And a few question and responses ago, I'm sorry I don't know your name, but you mentioned considering grandfathering as something that you were looking at as part of the plan. And if you could expand on that, if you could just give us like any more insight onto your thoughts or like what that might look like, I would love to hear about it. Even if it's just a thought in your head.
I really, yeah, I'm not speaking for the board, I'm just speaking for myself and kind of experience with past practices here, but this is a thing that in past redistricting efforts, the board has considered whether to, say that, 5th graders are, should go to the middle school that they were originally scheduled to go to, or whether they, and so that's really, the issue with that is cost and logistical complexity. Whether we have that as a provision or not. But to try to ease the transition, for example, if we're talking about the middle school transition that we did, changed in the feeder pattern several years ago, there was a 1-year grandfather. Was it 2 years? Where it was an opt-in. You could opt in, or you could send your kids to the school that the board made the change to. We have not had those discussions other than to talk about grandfathering in a very generic sense. I think we're all aware that it's an option that we can choose, and that there's a cost associated with that. But there will be far more conversations about that going forward. At this point, it's really just an idea. It's something that has been involved in redistricting discussions in the past, and it would probably be appropriate for us to discuss it in one fashion or another this time around.
Yeah, so just one thing to keep in mind, like Jeff said, with the middle school redistricting, the final decision by the board at that time was to grandfather the 7th and 8th graders, just because, middle school is only 3 years, and the superintendent at the time said he thought, it would be difficult to have that transition. And that created a lot of issues. First of all, it was very costly, because it was a 2-year. So the first year you had 2 grades that were being grandfathered. The second year there was 1. But it was, a couple of $1 million in transportation costs. And in addition to that, you had siblings going to different schools. So I think there were some families who were upset about that. I mean, my street, we had 2 buses. We had the Woods bus, and we had the Roger Limbo bus going down our street every day for 2 years. And that was just in middle school. I know back in 2003 when they did the all soup to nuts redistricting, high school, they did a little different because they just reopened the high school. So the first year they just had freshmen and sophomores. And then the next year, freshman, sophomore, junior, and then all 4 years the 3rd year. But for middle and elementary school, they just ripped the Band-Aid off and there was no grandfathering. So, I mean, there were kids who were in 4th grade at Osborne Hill School and they became 5th graders at Burt. They left the school they'd been at for 5 years, and it was the same with middle school too. And so there have been 2 different ways that we've done it, but that's just something to keep in mind. But the cost is extreme, and logistics are problematic as well. But you could certainly make the argument to stay in the school would be helpful as well.
Hi, just 2 quick follow-ups. One, I would disagree with one thing that Mr. Peterson said. I don't think there has ever been a grandfathering suggestion where you would say the 5th grader gets to continue at the originally districted middle school. It would be that the 5th grader doesn't need to move to the new elementary school. They get to stay at the school where they were. So just to make sure you're right. But the other thing I would say about grandfathering is that that is definitely one of the much later conversations. That is not something we're going to be talking about, I'm guessing, in January, because it comes with such a fiscal note. That's one of the last things I think will be, I'm not telling you not to tune out if that's something that's a primary concern, but that is definitely a later conversation, because once we decide on a plan, that's when we'll know the number of bodies that we're talking about moving or not, and then that's when we can better assess what would grandfathering look like and what would its fiscal note be. So.
I'm new to this process, but I think that in fact we may be talking about grandfathering sooner than that. I don't know, but I brought it up at our last meeting past the midnight hour, so it's sort of like a hazy memory for me. But I'm very, I'm very concerned about especially our high school students, and not moving students that have already started high school to another school building. I think it could be really an unfair burden to them in terms of the long-range plans they have for colleges and how it might impact their resume. So depending on the numbers, maybe that is something that we have to put in the charge. I don't know. We mentioned it the other night, so it sits on the table there.
So I prepared a statement. My name is Lori Algar, and I live at 167 Turning Road. I have a clinical doctorate in occupational therapy, and it's my job to understand the importance and meaningfulness of children's routines and occupations. I'm here to request a stricter policy on protecting elementary school children who are considered walkers and currently are not on a bus route. Please don't redistrict these children. According to Connecticut Childhood Obesity Report in 2018, 1/3 of Connecticut's youth are overweight or obese. A risk factor for obesity is physical inactivity. Having a child sit on a bus rather than walk or bike just to and from school supports physical inactivity. Also, the concern for mental health issues among our children, including anxiety and depression. And this is common knowledge that there's these issues, and there's numerous studies and meta-analysis that confirm the positive impact of exercise on decreasing anxiety and depression in our children. In addition, studies also define beneficial and lasting effects of physical exercise on cognitive function, with increased blood flow to the brain and neurotransmitter levels, enhanced plasticity, and better focused attention and information processing. So please consider not depriving the students who are walkers of these important health and educational benefits. And just as a follow-up question, I'm wondering if there's any comments from you on the stancing. My understanding is that it's guideline right now not to redistrict walkers, but it's not policy, and therefore it's still a possibility.
I think it's safe to say it's always been a possibility. There is no policy that says it. The only policies we have really in this realm that we're talking about are transportation and busing, distances at the different levels.
I guess along those lines, it would be a resource, almost like wasteful of a resource, right, to use buses for children who don't need them.
I don't necessarily think anyone would argue with that, but we have to see scenarios. We have to take everything into consideration. I can't speak for other board members, but I'm sure we would all, in general, agree when we don't have to move somebody that can take a walk to school. We wouldn't want to, but to sit here and say that we can guarantee that, I couldn't do that.
And just when we're talking about walkers, I think that, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, we're considering students that are currently not being provided transportation by the Fairfield Public Schools. Because I know that there are many people that can walk to school, but we consider them bus routes. Also, there's some students that might be able to walk to elementary schools, depending on where they live. So in looking at plans, just because you walk to one school doesn't necessarily mean you couldn't potentially get moved to another school and still be a walker. So just wanted to put that out there for everybody.
Hi, Katie Glenn, 204 Grandview Road, and excuse me as I try and garble this out. There was a fact on one of the slides that kind of jumped to my attention, and it was that there are currently 9 less classrooms due to lower enrollment. And those classrooms have been used to accommodate other programming, thank goodness, but it just made me think, how much has this general push for efficiency from our wider community been placed above academic excellence, especially now when students need more and more support? And I don't think this is really a pie in the sky idea, as we have class sizes that are generally larger than our surrounding communities, especially K through 3. So I'm not saying that redistricting isn't needed to rectify facility utilization, but are we pushing or driving a narrative of efficiency at the cost of looking at building in lower class sizes or expanding programmatics like foreign language? I'm just curious your thoughts on this general negative efficiency narrative, I guess is the way to.
I thought it was.
Sorry. Because McKinley currently does have lower class sizes. So on paper, you might be moving those children, but you're moving them, adding a transition, and increasing their class size. So maybe you can speak to that as well.
Yes, very careful.
All right, to kind of, no, that's okay, but to start to deal with your last point first. The lower class sizes in McKinley have been a structural decision by the board as to be an extra support for the kids who need it at that school. That is not something we have across the district. I will say that I think a concern of this board is going to be, currently the kids at McKinley have a lot of supports that some schools around the district do not have, or at least not at the amount that McKinley does. Whether we're going to add additional resources to other schools, how we're going to spread that out and support everybody, I'm sure that's going to be in our conversation going forward. Like that's a thing that we have to think about and having initial discussions about anyway. The point that you made, I think, about efficiency, I'm not really thinking about it in those terms. But one thing that I would ask people to remember is that for every kid in a I don't want to call them underpopulated, but in an underutilized school, there is a kid in an overutilized school, or at the edge of being overcrowded. And one of the things that I would like to do is try to harmonize across the district to whatever degree possible. Because yeah, there are plenty of kids who, their buildings are, 60, 65, 70% of what our state capacity is, and that's great for them. But that's not the experience of every kid in Fairfield. So I'm not really thinking about it in terms of jamming the most kids into the smallest space. I'm trying to think about harmonizing student experience across the district. And I would also point out that one of the things, and we talked about this briefly earlier, in the planning principles that we voted on the other night, we did reduce our capacity target for elementary school from 90%, which has been used in past plans, back down to 85%, with the understanding that there are schools that need extra instructional spaces, and that schools that may have those now, we may not want to take those away. So that's something that's also kind of, both coming to our discussion and taking concrete form in our planning principles that we voted on Tuesday.
Just briefly, I don't have a lot to add, but you were reading my mind because the first thing I wrote down when we got here was class size, K through 2. I've been thinking about that a lot, and I hope it's something that we can bring to the board for conversation for the same reasons, thinking about moving these students out of McKinley and how does that impact them across the district and their needs. So thank you for bringing that up.
David's having a party. 155.
And then this is just because you guys threw up the state statute, and this is kind of a two-component. There has been a lot of legal action at the federal level, kind of saying that dispersing kids unraised and moving kids unraised is not, so that's been argued several times. So do you guys have a plan if parents were to bring a class action at some point? And number two, I'm gonna do a second one. I'm gonna throw them the other way. I'm gonna throw the other way. And also, has there been any discussion about pushing the state while we have two laws that are really basically competing against each other? We have a law that, you know, really compels our town to build affordable housing. We have a town that has really forced us to build affordable housing in one area, and to move these students with so many transients, 35%, 53% in McKinley, are we gonna be back here again in 18 months? So without a concentration provision on the state statute, is it worth going down this road?
So first of all, I won't, and I hope none of my board members comment on any potential litigation or anything, so we won't do that. But with regard to the state statute and has there been any thought to push back or whatnot, I think it's safe to say, yes, we have tried to push back. And we got it pushed back in our face with the threat of a 10-4B hearing, which is initiated, heard by, and judged by the State Board of Education. So just so you know, that's a fact. So if they initiate a 10-4B, they're also the ones that hear it and rule on it. And while the state law and statute doesn't necessarily have any fiscal teeth to it, a 10-4B can. And we did consult our attorney and our legal team, and we thoroughly discussed this. And to the dismay of many, we have to move forward.
And I can speak on the other end of that. I did ask lawmakers over the last couple of years in my previous district to have that changed because it does impact inter-district magnet schools and funding. So for example, Fairchild Wheeler inter-district magnet, which some Fairfield kids do attend, has to stay within racial balance as well. And when it does not, it's not a luxury, but you can lower the enrollment of accepted students on the high side to balance it out. But you lose $7,000 per child from the state. So over the course of the last almost 10 years, there's a third of a reduction in the enrollment at the school, which caused over a $3 million loss in revenue. So they have no appetite, according to state lawmakers, to even revisit this at this time. No one wants to touch it. You missed the... Oh.
Hi, thank you. So I have a really... Oh, name and address. Yes, Candace Patnazzi, 106 Old Post Road. So I have a really dumb question. But at this point, is redistricting a done deal in 424? And it's not really if we're going to do it, that's up for debate, but it's how we're going to do it that's up for debate? That's the case. Okay. Then I don't really have a question, but rather a statement. And I'm sure you guys have heard this probably ad nauseum, but you haven't heard it from me. And so I think I would be remiss if I didn't have my voice heard. So I'm just gonna read something that I prepared. Again, hello, my name is Candace Pagnazzi, and I'm here representing my daughter and all other children like her who suffer from mental health issues, big or small. These children are the COVID kids, and we've all heard the statistics of such things plaguing more of this generation than not, with an increase in both anxiety and depression nationwide. They've experienced an educational journey none of us will ever understand. They're merely just getting settled into their school life without restrictions. Is it really time to, once again, rip them from the comfort of their now routine? Routine. This is a word that I never knew would have so much meaning until I learned all about anxiety and how it can manifest itself in children. My daughter looks like your typical 7-year-old, running around playing with her friends, a silly toothless grin on her face. But what you can't see by looking at her is that she often has crippling anxiety looming below the surface. In addition to outside intervention, what keeps that anxiety at bay and from rearing its ugly head is, you guessed it, routine. She thrives in an environment where she can rely on the comfort of consistency. The unknown is a very scary place to be. Change can throw her way off course. The change between school years and what that entails, new teacher, new curriculum, new friends, is very difficult for someone struggling with anxiety, and that's even within the same school. We have spent countless hours and money working on this, and it has all been very well worth it because she has made significant strides. This proposed redistricting, without grandfathering existing students, I know we said we would talk about that, but without grandfathering existing students, of course I lost my place, will surely be the demise of that progress. Continued change and upheaval will prove to be detrimental to many children's already fragile mental health. The thought of even beginning to tell her that she will need to start a school year in a different school is enough to bring me to tears. Tears for her and all of these children. How do I explain to her, trust the process, when I myself don't? Facility utilization, got it, understood. But racial imbalance, academic excellence, what do those buzzword phrases really mean? I'm not sure who needs to hear this, but why do such things need to be force-fed? And why would those be more important than the mental and physical well-being for children? I myself am a product of the Fairfield Public Schools. During my time, I couldn't tell you if my schools were racially balanced because I didn't care to look at it that way. I did not stop to think and or realize if there were quotas being filled for each ethnic group. I just realized that I had a lot of great people and friends at my schools. Was it predominantly white students? Perhaps. But that does not mean the school system was breeding racists. Not in my case, at least, because I was taught to respect people of all shapes, sizes, colors, etc. at home. I truly hope these words do not fall on deaf ears, as their message is so important for our children's future, and our children are the future. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yeah, you.
I'm just wondering, because 11 and 10 seem to be the big elephant in the room, why can't you just send that to SLAM now, get it out of the way, and then you can present whatever you need to finance and get the ball rolling and help you guys with the redistricting conversation? That's
One very quick point to that, it's not just, if we were only looking at facility utilization, spot on, but what about the ECC? And so, everything is affecting it. Like, if we keep the ECC the way it is now at Stratfield, that's one utilization rate. If we move it to Holland Hill, that's a different utilization rate. If we decide to close it at the high school and move it to a single elementary school, that's a different plan as well. So it's, I understand what you're asking for. Never mind that we then have to pay the consultant twice. But, you know, I can easily see that from certain perspectives, that would be money well spent. But again, it's, every stage of this is the reminder that there is no one thing in isolation in any part of this. So.
But it's pretty easy to see. If you go to 10 or you go to 11, figure out where the ECC is going.
No, because what if the ECC is going to go into a pattern of 11, or what is it if it's going to go into a shared pattern with 10, or what if we're going to 10 and pulling it out of ward altogether and having it take up the space entirely?
But we've already discussed 10 going out to happen, so get it on.
Where did we say 10 wasn't happening?
We've already heard other people say 10 not.
What you heard Mrs. Gerber say very specifically is that will have no credibility with other town bodies until we have a consultant who says it as well. Because I promise you other town bodies are interested.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So then we have, here, I guess what I would say is this, we're committed to doing the full project. And because there is law behind this, a redistricting is going to happen. And that's not because we're gung-ho excited for it, but there is law that is prompting that. And since that is happening, we want to do it right and not tell a family, you get to be redistricted twice, because everyone else only wanted to be redistricted once.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying 10 and 11 is the big decision. And then you can figure out a district.
Okay, I don't want to repeat myself, so.
We need a motion to adjourn.
All right, so before we wrap up this evening, thank you all so much for coming out and being here, whether you ask questions or we're just here to learn something or, just see where we're at right now. I appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a busy time of year and I'm really grateful that you came out tonight. So a couple upcoming meetings to pay attention to. January 4th, Board of Ed room. We're going to be talking about the draft redistricting charge that will go to the consultant. January 5th, we're going to repeat tonight, but we're going to do it in a virtual format. So in case people weren't able to get out tonight, we're going to do it on a WebEx. So it'll be a repeat. So more than welcome to come again. Might be new questions that other new people have, or it'll be recorded, so you'll be able to watch that if you don't want to attend that one. And then at this point, January 10th, the regular Board of Education meeting is where we will be planning to vote on the charge to the consultant. So that gives you 3 dates to save date for. So with that, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Asa, can I get a second? Mrs. Gerber, all in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Testani.
Happy holidays and happy new year.
It's not better.